Private markets have been doing very well.
You have to invest locally.
Big undersupply for retail for a while.
The large markets, Chicago.
Let's go ahead and dive into this exciting topic, which is healthcare needs space but won't save office. So premise of this particular article is that there are some use cases where medical users are able to enter into some office buildings. Obviously, more of the suburban offices that they've described. There's been a lot of rhetoric in the general populace regarding potentially converting office buildings into primarily residential uses, but there's a contingent of people that have tried to see if maybe doing like a medical office building, but multi-story, could work. But again, it seems like a lot of these, in particular, on-demand services, when it comes to medical, they are typically looking for kind of street retail spaces, or ones that have easy access, high visibility. There's only certain types of office spaces that could potentially work. Plus, there's a lot of requirements that, need to be factored in when you're talking about building out these spaces. So it talks a lot about like, the HVAC needs, equipment, staffing, as far as like facility requirements. I know there's a lot of legislative restrictions in certain regards regarding licensing. So, there's a lot more things that are involved in the actual equation of whether or not a medical user can go on site. And depending on what type of medical use it is, obviously there's different requirements. And so just kind of talked a little bit about some of the use cases for putting in life science uses into existing office buildings and how that could potentially help alleviate some of the issues. But realistically, it's not going to give nearly the dent it needs to. I thought I'd kind of share this with the audience and just kind of get their brain turning when it comes to ideas for different properties.
You find these couple office buildings in great locations in downtowns where you should be reaching out to your local municipalities and asking them in regards to zoning what they would allow, and what they would like to see here. You're like, say like, hey, listen, I'm working with a couple, even if you're not specifically working with that type of tenant, be like, listen, I'm working with a couple medical tenants. We're looking for some space. I think this could be a good, lucrative thing. I know it doesn't say that, medical might be allowed, but I was curious, like, what are you looking to see here? Would you guys be okay with medical uses? Do you think this is something that we might be able to get past? Having, a lot of conversations, or at least more conversations these days than previous with your local municipalities with these types of redevelopment plays is going to allow you to be able to fill up spaces where other people might have major vacancy over time.
Absolutely. And obviously on the investment side, I mean, you're always looking for value add opportunities. So you always have to think creatively when it comes to deals that are coming across your desk. And so if you see a building that has a significant amount of vacancy and you start thinking about ways to be able to reposition the asset, thinking about all these different requirements for these different types of commercial tenants could very well benefit you in the long run if you were able to acquire that asset and then backfill the space to support that.
Yeah, I also want to mention, by the way, for those of you who are watching, I'm curious, in your local markets, what are you seeing starting to occupy office space? Put it in the chat box down below or comment down below wherever you're watching this. To get your thoughts of how are they repurposing office space in your local markets. Love to hear that.
All right. So next up is Henry's article. So Wells Fargo deepens cuts to real estate portfolio with latest office offloading.
Yeah. So the Wells Fargo building is losing their main tenant, Wells Fargo. I thought that was kind of interesting, but this is actually happening all over. They're actually trying to, they're cutting back on their footprint in the office sector, noticing they don't need as much office space, just like everybody. They're noticing that they're kind of following suit here. So I thought that was actually kind of fascinating. But it was actually kind of interesting. If you look down here real quick, just leave it the way it is. At the second to bottom paragraph, where it says, excluding its space in the Capitol Center Tower, Wells Fargo leases just shy of 508,000 square feet of office space in the triangle. And according to CoStar data, the bank's total North Carolina footprint spans upwards of 2.5 million square feet of office space. This is obviously a healthy chunk of its 25.5 million square feet nationally of its portfolio. So anyways, I just think it's freaking insane how much space actually Wells Fargo not only owns, but occupies nationally. And I think that we're going to start seeing a lot of shifts in this type of space. So we were just talking about how they're repurposing. I think Wells Fargo should take a quick note of some of the comment section down below of what we're seeing in the marketplace of how they can repurpose their buildings. So I just thought this was an interesting thing to see.
Yeah, absolutely. So it says something about the bank is said to have paid about $550 million late last year to purchase about $445,000 of Neiman Marcus store in New York's Hudson Yards. So, I guess they're still making plays. They're still making plays, I guess, in the real estate space. But yeah, and this kind of goes to show some of the benefits of leasing in that that, if they had owned this entire building, which I don't know if they do own or not, but it seems like they're just
no, I think they own it.
Oh, they own it. Okay, so they remove themselves from there, and I'm assuming they're probably going to try to lease up the remainder or whatever. So okay, yeah, because I know it's sometimes in office towers they just give the anchor tenant the name on the building. I know here in Louisville we had a building that's traded several not necessarily traded, but they've changed the name of the building several times because they've had like big footprint of a tenant in there for a while, and then it switched over to something else, and so.
Yeah, I was pretty sure they own it, but I guess I know you're right with that mention. But anyways, we'll have to look into that. But yeah, I agree. A huge benefit of being able to lease. You just say, deuces, we'll see you later.
Yeah, and you can reduce your footprint right away, and it gives you that flexibility. So kind of goes to show, like, depending on the business, sometimes it's just best to lease, even though obviously you lose out on the equity buildup and tax benefits, but it's not a foregone conclusion.
I've typically mentioned to people that you should rent typically for at least the first beginning few years of your business, see how your business does. And then if your business starts to do really well, when you expand, buy in a shopping plaza or office building where you can get extra tenants, where you have the ability to kind of lower the risk across with the diversification of having more tenants.
Yeah, we're looking at office building right now. That's a multi-tenant building, and my client needs to occupy like roughly 3,000 to 4,000 square feet, and there's about 8,000 left that they're going to rent out, or they already have. It's already rented out part of it, so it's going to offset their mortgage payment. So it's kind of a cool strategy to employ, kind of a house hack for commercial property. Sure. So next up is. Oh yeah, it's a great strategy. So next up is article that references Washington sports teams, the Capitals and Wizards, to move to New Virginia Complex in 2028. So if you guys are familiar with the Capitals and the Wizards, obviously the Capitals and Wizards played in the same stadium. I believe it was in Chinatown. I actually lived in the DC metro area for 2 years out of college. Great city. I really enjoyed my time there. But the hockey team and the basketball team played in the same stadium, and obviously that's more of a, not necessarily a legacy stadium, but it was kind of one of the older stadiums. And now they're getting a brand new, beautiful facility in Alexandria, which is just across the river, roughly 8 miles away from where they were, Washington D.C. And so that's going to be not only a stadium, but it's going to be a mixed use project. So the main entity that owns both the Washington Nationals and the Capitals, the Wizards and the Capitals, I should say, is this group called it's something entertainment group. It's here in the article, but essentially they're going to relocate their headquarters to that site. So Monument. There you go. So they're going to relocate their headquarters to the site and also have mixed use development. So they'll have retail, apartments, and hotels and everything else, and then they'll have the actual stadium there, and it's going to be a multi-billion-dollar investment. They're getting a lot of funds from the city and municipalities to offset some of the costs, but this kind of goes to show some of these projects, and I know we've talked about it in previous episodes, where you start following the path of progress. You better believe that land in this area when this project was announced probably skyrocketed and went through the roof. And obviously property values in this area are probably likely going to go up because of the fact there's a sizable amount of investment. It's going to bring a lot of traffic to the area. So you're going to obviously have a lot of retailers that want to locate there, and they're willing to pay top dollar to be located in close proximity to this particular location. It's only going to amplify future development in the area as well. So again, I just thought I'd showcase some of these articles where we talk about some of these topics.
I love seeing this kind of stuff, because again, for those locals, I'm constantly trying to pay attention to New Jersey development projects, because it's like, I want to know where I need to be focusing my efforts and my team's efforts for prospecting, saying like, hey, like, there's this huge development project going up. I definitely want to own real estate right near it, or as close to it as possible, knowing that I'm definitely going to get the benefits of appreciation down the road.
Yeah, for sure. So I agree. I think it's going to be an interesting project, and obviously not just this project, but there's other projects around the country that, if you do see, these types of opportunities come available, hopefully you can benefit from the appreciation that follows. So next up is one of Henry's articles. It says refinancing woes threatened to raise delinquencies, higher rates prompted shorter terms, bondholders put on hold.
Well, it was basically just saying that because of, actually, I don't know if you noticed, actually, I should probably flip this over, but it was showing that because interest rates have been so high and there's been a lack of refinancing in the previous years, they're saying that they're actually going to start, they're saying that considering the rates right now, they're trying to say, and at least I kind of somewhat agree with them, is that refinancing has been kind of stagnant. There has not been as much refinancing. Last year was a very, very low refi year. Actually, I'm just going to pop over their interest rates, where actually we did have a little bit of a tick up, by the way, for CMBS loans, by the way, which I thought was interesting. It's also saying that, like, hey, that there's going to be there's actually going to be quite a bit more delinquency in the markets, because there's not, the interest rates are still quite high. And, as like, let's just say if your loan was coming due last year and interest rates were high, you're having a hard time to refinance. And if that continues to drag on, like if they can continue to delay and delay and delay, interest rates dropping to a point where it's actually going to be lucrative enough for people to refinance and not struggle too much, they're going to see that there's going to be a little bit more delinquencies. So I just think it's fascinating that, like, at least from what I'm seeing, we're kind of having this mixed feedback around when they're actually going to have rates drop again, actually legitimately drop. And if you see, like, actually just scroll up real fast. Hold on.
Scroll up, yeah.
Yeah.
Wait, up here? Okay.
Yeah, right here. Like, we're projecting the overall US CMBS delinquency rate will increase to 4.5% in 2024 and 4.9% in 2025 from 2.25% as of November 2023, which is due to more maturity and defaults from higher interest rates, tighter access to capital, few special servicing resolutions, as well as less new issuance and increased loan modifications. So just super fascinating how, like, we're seeing, like, it's just cool. Like, I love that we're doing this, obviously at a continuous basis where we're starting to see people make predictions and then things change.
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, and we're going to be following along with this the rest of the year. And then those numbers will probably shift. They'll be like, well, actually now it's, 4 points, whatever. But it's cool. I mean, and you're right. I mean, but also I think what's interesting to kind of point this out is that, we're at, let's say 2.25% as of right now. And that's we're only going to be potentially, quote unquote, doubling the delinquency rate, but it's only going to be 4.5%. You may look at some headlines saying, hey, there's going to be a doubling of delinquency. And if you were just going to read that for at face value, you'd be like, oh my gosh, this is, going to be, a catastrophic wave of CMBS delinquencies. But in reality, it is 4.5%, which is definitely higher than it was before, but it's not a catastrophic type territory. And it does reference here that there's going to be fewer special servicing resolutions, which, is kind of a function of just being in a kind of less economically favorable environment. But, if for some reason, things get worse for, again, in the economy, who's to say that we don't have involvement from governmental agencies as well? So, that's kind of what has happened in the past. And that doesn't necessarily mean it's going to happen today or in the future. But again, you can't rule that out completely just because it's already happened many times before.
Yeah. And obviously we'll keep our fingers on the pulse for you to kind of see how things trend, end up trending out here. But, because I actually thought delinquencies would be higher, to be honest with you. So it's actually interesting to see that it's only 2.25% as of November of this past year, and only going to get as high as 4 and change percent.
So next up is actually a topic we've talked about probably a decent amount on this live stream, which is the transfer tax that's occurring or being proposed in Chicago. If you guys aren't familiar, the proposal is that they will be lowering the transfer tax for transactions sub 1 million. So really, it's going to affect mostly. It's going to hopefully alleviate some of the residential transfer tax burden. But when it comes to properties between 1 million and 1.5 million, it would be 2%. And once you get above 1.5 million, it'll increase to 3%, which is effectively quadrupling the rate of transfer tax as it currently stands. And so, they propose to be using some of this money to provide additional services in the form of, whatever services they're willing to provide. And now what's happening is that they've talked about some of these agencies or entities, like the funding behind the money behind some of these, like these initiatives. And so let me see if I can pull up, the campaign committee supporting the referendum, which is the referendum being the transfer tax modification. The campaign committee supporting the referendum has raised more than $700,000 since September, including $200,000 from SEIU, Healthcare Illinois, and in Indiana, and $500K from Michael Reese Health Trust. So, obviously these political agencies are starting to raise capital to do these, door knocking campaigns, to focus on mailers, to focus on, whatever outreach they can do to kind of bring people on their side as far as the support's concerned. And then, the other group on the opposite side, which are, realtors in opposition to the real estate transfer tax. So led by Illinois Realtors Group, they're now starting to raise money to kind of follow a similar campaign, but on the opposite side, to kind of build dissension as far as, the transfer tax item. So anytime there are these types of proposals, you're going to start seeing a lot of special interest groups and people coming in to kind of support things or deny things or whatever else. So I'm interested to see how it all plays out.
I mean, like we had mentioned last time, I think it's just kind of laughable when these types of cities or states think that this is actually the way to do it. But in reality, it's like, hey, like if you just increased everything by 5% or 2% or whatever percent, you'd actually have a lot more people for it, and you could get there gradually. And it's like these people, it's just like, yeah, what is the purpose of trying to quadruple? Why do you think that anybody's going to support a quadrupling of tax rates? Is just asinine, in my opinion, to think personally. However, you know, who knows what they're actually trying to pull off with this stunt. And also, I think it's funny that even these healthcare organizations, like what the heck's a healthcare organization dropping $500,000 trying to support this? I just think it's kind of weird.
It's just funny. You go into this like gray area of politics where it's like there's definitely special interests involved in some way. Now, I'm not an expert in this, so I can't comment on it, but I guarantee you there's money changing hands. So
I'm okay throwing conspiracy theories out there. I'm okay.
Yeah. Henry's a conspiracy one. All right. So next up is one of Henry's articles, which is Burger King parent to acquire biggest U.S. franchisee in $1 billion deal. That's crazy.
Yeah. So I thought this was wild. Okay. Basically what Burger King is trying to do now, okay, which apparently is owned by the, so I think it's called Restaurant or something like that.
Carol's Restaurant Group.
Yeah. Yeah. So they're buying Carol's Restaurant Group. Yeah. So what I think this is very interesting. Burger King is now going to buy their largest franchisee, which has, you know, several hundred locations. I think it was like 600 locations. Or
it says a thousand locations.
Yeah, 1,000 locations, which is just freaking wild to me because they're on this. I'm trying to see exactly where it says it started at the top because part of the company's turnaround drive to rapidly upgrade and remodel its restaurants. So super interesting that they plan on just buying back 1,000 of their locations so they can quickly get some of this, you know, these types of new standards that they're trying to set in. Good for Carol's. Congratulations on the transaction. That's awesome.
Absolutely.
I just think that, you know, what would be interesting to see is a lot more of this with other organizations. Like the older franchises, like you start seeing a lot of these types of companies coming in and trying to revamp things and doing a lot of buyback. So anyways, I just think that might be interesting if you know people who own a lot of XYZ types of franchises. Like I have a couple of people that we know that have dozens and dozens and dozens, if not a few hundred Dunkin' Donuts locations, as well as a few other much older franchise types of locations. And doing a buyback might be pretty interesting for for corporate. So anyways, thought it'd be kind of interesting to see. I mean, like this is definitely the new dynamic of what we see coming. I don't know if you saw this, Raphael, or anybody who's listening can comment down below because I think this is actually pretty interesting. Did you guys see the McDonald's with 0 employees?
Oh, you mean like the automated McDonald's? I haven't seen it yet.
It was a 100% automated McDonald's, 0 employees. And it was very fascinating to at least look at it and see what it looks like, see not only what it looks like, but how it operates. And I just think that, you know, you could start seeing a lot more of that over time, hence them buying back a lot of these locations. I thought that'd be pretty interesting to show.
Yeah, no, 100%. And obviously, you know, there's different reasons for wanting to do that. Obviously, they want to control the quality of what they're producing, and not to say that the Carol's Restaurant Group, I'm sure they were phenomenal operators, but I'm sure a lot of that stock, I mean, you don't get to 1,000 restaurants overnight. So I bet a lot of these restaurants also were probably outdated and needed updating and whatever else. And so I would imagine Burger King's logic is to come in, buy the restaurants, get them updated, get them producing at, you know, a relatively high level. And I wouldn't be surprised.
Well, it shows here that actually Carol's generated $1.8 billion in their systems across the last 12 months across their 1,022 locations. So if you do some math here, let's take out the handy dandy calculator. 1.8 billion divided by how many locations? 1,022. Yeah. That means each location on average was doing 1.7 million per location, which is, you know, it's pretty decent.
That's great. That's great, man. I mean, you know, it's fascinating to see some of these franchises and what they can generate. I mean, obviously Chick-fil-A is the runaway. I mean, they're generating in excess of $6 million per store. And then one that was fascinating to me was Krispy Kreme. I mean, Krispy Kreme apparently the average store generates like $3.5 to $4 million, which is nuts. I had no idea. I had no idea that a Krispy Kreme was able to generate that type of revenue. And, you know, so again, some of these operators, man, they make a lot of money if you have the proper amount of restaurants. And you see a lot of athletes too. Like Shaq owns a bunch of fast food concepts that do very well. I know Rick Ross owns a bunch of Wingstops. LeBron owns a ton. You're right, 100%. He owns a Blaze, a big stake in Blaze right.
too. Big stake, exactly. It's very, very interesting what they're going to get invested in.
Business, man. It's fascinating. And I wouldn't wouldn't mind getting into some own some franchises like that in the future. Now, I don't know if it's going to be food or what, but at some point it wouldn't be a bad thing to explore.
Hey, it's pretty cool to acquire a bunch of franchises, then have them all of a sudden be bought out by the parent company. That'd be pretty nice.
And you can find those a lot easier because there's a proven model. You've got a lot of systems in place. Like franchises tend to have a much higher success rate than a brand new startup. So, banks
that's like 86% versus like 4%.
Absolutely. So, it's more recurring and everything else. And like you said, you may have an exit strategy in 15 years. You decide to sell back to corporate, or you sell it to another entity, and then you keep the real estate, and then you become a long-term landlord. And I've represented clients that have done that in the past, and it's a really smart strategy. So, anyways, I digress. All right. So next up is lower interest rates and an industrial boom. Peter Linneman predictions for the U.S. economy. So if you guys haven't had a chance to watch Walker Webcast, it's probably one of my favorite interview series on commercial real estate and really just, the economy as a whole. Willie Walker, the CEO of Walker Dunlop, is a really impressive guy. But, he has people that come on that are, head honchos at massive firms that kind of talk about a variety of different things related to the economy, and obviously Peter Linneman is a world-renowned economist. I believe he teaches at the Wharton School in Pennsylvania. Yeah, he does. Again, he just kind of talked a little bit about what he predicts is going to happen over the next couple of years. He believes, to start off with, that inflation will return to a more quote-unquote reasonable rate, which will be in that 1.5% to 2.25%. And then the 10-year treasury is going to drop to 3.5%, which obviously will put downward pressure on interest rates. And he apparently does predict 5 interest rate cuts in 2024, which is somewhat contrary to what a lot of people, in particular the Fed, has signaled, just being a couple. I think 2 or 3 is what they had initially projected or priced into the market. One of the things he talks about, obviously the stance that the Fed's taking is the Fed's interesting, and obviously there's a lot of commentary about the Fed because they say, okay, well, they only look at a certain amount of metrics. They look at inflation and they look at unemployment. And so right now they're looking at unemployment, and it's not quite where they want it to be as far as the numbers are concerned. So they're really just trying to hold steady so they can see those unemployment numbers begin to rise. But what a lot of times they fail to factor in is people who maybe lost their job or maybe transitioned away during the pandemic and still have not looked for jobs in the workforce because they're not factored in to that active unemployment rate, because unemployment is factored in when people are actively looking for jobs. So, he's saying that we're likely already in that territory that we need to be as far as unemployment, but the Fed hasn't, decided to kind of kick back into gear as far as lowering their Fed funds target rate because they haven't seen inflation where they needs to be. And he thinks that's kind of silly in his eyes. Yeah. So again, just kind of, talking a little bit about how the private markets have been doing very well, but real estate has been kind of one of those industries that have just been really kind of in a log jam because we're so heavily debt driven as far as an industry is concerned. So, he predicts that 24 will be an opportunity for commercial real estate to hopefully have some relief. And then he talks a lot about construction of real estate. Obviously the big construction projects in the space have been industrial and multifamily, which is no surprise. And he believes that those are still going to be 2 property types that are going to be worthwhile to pursue in certain markets. Obviously, he does highlight the fact that there is oversupply in certain markets. That's why real estate is so local. It's very specific to local. So you really got to understand your local market to know whether or not it's undersupplied or oversupplied. And then, we dive into more and more stuff where he talks about, where he sees vacancy rates going, our gross domestic product, and over time where he sees, more general economic conditions either improving or whatever else. But he does I guess moral of this particular article is he does have a very optimistic view on where we're going to be over the next 12 to 24 months.
I thought it was actually interesting how much money is being poured still into industrial. It's actually mind blowing, to be honest with you. Just like personally, if you scroll up just a smidge more, like I actually would have not guessed that it would have been more than 2 times what multifamily is doing right now. I would have not guessed that. Quite fascinating. And also $81 billion right now for new construction in office is mind blowing, which is almost double the amount in retail. I would guess it was the other way around.
That's what's shocking to me is like there's probably going to be a very big undersupply for retail for a while because there hasn't been a whole lot of new development in the space, at least. And I could comment locally because I can't comment about other markets. I'm sure in other, the Sun Belt, maybe there's a lot more retail development happening. But here, I mean, there's a constrained supply in retail, and retail still is very active. I mean, the retail markets are very active. So that was a shock to me. I mean, I was very surprised to see that.
Mind blown that retail is honestly that far behind everything else. So good to see. I mean, hey, great data, great information. I appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you guys, like I said, if you guys haven't watched Willie Walker's stuff, Walker Webcast, I mean, I highly encourage you. It really is probably one of the best out there for just valuable information on the industry. Next up is property market remains distressed, but sentiment edges higher.
If you had to assume, right? Just take this test yourself. What do you think is the market for 2024 going to look like by the end of the year for each of these different sectors? Do you think, no decline, increase, decrease, whatever it is? I mean, office, they're saying more than 44% of people, right, are stating that there's going to be more than a 20% decline in office. 39% of people responded saying that there'd be a 0 to 5% decline for residential sales this year. Self-storage, they're saying no decline, probably an increase for self-storage. Same thing with industrial. Looks like most of the sentiment is that there is going to be little to no decline, if not an increase, probably. Same thing with hotels, which I thought was very fascinating. They're saying there's going to be some very, very good sentiment in regards to hotels, very good sentiment in regards to retail as well. It really just seems like the biggest outliers to me were the residential and the office. To me, was actually kind of interesting. I mean, I wasn't surprised with the office, but like the retail, I don't know. I was kind of surprised thinking that so many people have such poor sentiment thoughts, at least for the year to come in regards to valuations.
And I mean, even multifamily, it's a mixed bag, man. Like, it's kind of interesting, right? You see like the different color shades and everything else. Obviously, it's skewing more towards not being a big shift, which I tend to agree with. I mean, I think overall, obviously, multifamily and industrial are still going to be really strong property types, and obviously that's location specific. But that's was somewhat of a surprise to me because, if you probably looked at this chart 2 years ago, you would have probably had it flipped, where it's like people think multifamily is increasing by 10% or 20% or 15%. It just goes to show what happens, right? That's why we follow this news as closely as we do, is because you start realizing the trends, and hopefully you pick up fact patterns over time that you can then draw on when you're, doing these types of, when you decide to take on either development projects or you're representing investors. You can be a lot more eloquent when it comes to things that are going on. Next up is an article about how the Midwest has won. Nation's midsection enjoys best rent growth in the country. Again, it kind of goes to show and references that the Midwest, and what they define as the Midwest is like kind of like the Greater Lakes region. So you factor in Minneapolis, Minnesota, Illinois, Indiana, Ohio, in Missouri, those types of areas is where you're seeing a significant amount of rent growth. And obviously Louisville, where I'm located, is kind of in that category, but maybe not quite to the level of some of these other markets. But it is definitely growing quite a bit too. And I think part of the reason for this, and it doesn't necessarily directly relate this in the article, but is that we don't really, in the middle of the country, you don't typically see these boom and bust cycles where, obviously you see on the coast where in times where things are going really well, you start seeing massive expansion in warm weather climates, where people are moving to. And, obviously on the coast, you'll see a lot of swings as far as equity is concerned. But then when you start going into an economic recession or a change in economic sentiment, then obviously you start seeing more of a contraction in these volatile markets. Whereas in the Midwest, it's pretty stable. I mean, it's a relatively stable home. You may see, slight increases and slight decreases, but for the most part, it's not nearly as volatile as some of these other markets. But regarding, the reasoning for the increase as far as rents are concerned is because of supply and demand. So one of the big things is that they kind of highlight Chicago as being one of the city particularly that they profiled. And one of the reasons is they just haven't had as much development for newer product in the market. So when new product does come online, it fills up relatively quickly. There's a variety of reasons for that. One of the big ones is it's just a lot harder to get entitlements and developments done in this market, and obviously for better or for worse. Now, if you can get a development done, it's great for you because you've had to go through all the issues and red tape and whatever else to get the product online, and hopefully you'll be benefiting from the increased value that you achieve as a result. But again, it kind of creates a moat around existing product in a lot of these markets. And so, Chicago may be different than other markets like Indianapolis, Cincinnati. Obviously where markets where it's harder to develop, existing product becomes a lot more attractive and more valuable. So, again, I thought it would just kind of be interesting to share. Obviously, they go into a lot of different details as far as why they think that, the rents in these markets have been trending upward as opposed to other markets around the country. But, I thought I'd kind of just share that with you because, again, it just goes to show that real estate is so location specific.
Yeah, I mean, it says right here in suburban Chicago, construction is up 103% year over year, which is incredible. Yeah, I mean, look, I love articles like this because if you're looking to get into investment in real estate and you're like, my hyper local market sucks, or it's like really difficult, it's really expensive, it's whatever, you make it like whatever excuse you got, right? This is a great reminder to say like, hey, like no one's telling you that you have to invest locally. There's a lot of great markets all over the country that are seeing fantastic opportunities rise, and it's just finding a way to get some information in regards to those markets, start looking for deals in those markets, and pick up a property or two, right? I mean, like this is fantastic information in regards to some of the markets that have not been affected much in the last 12 to 24 months, which is fantastic news, especially because there's been a lot of markets that have been drastically affected over the last 12 to 24 months when it comes to rental markets, like pricing wise. It's good to see. And, maybe I'm definitely going to take some time to do some homework as to what markets I would love to look into. This is also funny because if you look at it right here, roughly a third of the Midwestern and Northeastern metros were home to a year-over-year rent growth of more than 3% or more in 2023, largely due to the more than constrained supply, according to obviously to December RealPage multifamily report. Among the large markets, Chicago led the way in rising markets, followed by northern New Jersey, which I thought was quite fascinating. I mean, like I'm pretty familiar with that. That market's on fire. So yeah, I just cool to see all the different markets that are absolutely crushing it. Like you had mentioned.
Like you said, and I think important too, like you had mentioned, is educating yourself on these different markets, because for those of you guys who are tuning in from maybe secondary or tertiary markets, I mean, this can give you some ideas on different markets maybe you should consider targeting or educating yourself on, so that you can formulate your prospecting around approaching these owners in these markets. And obviously you have some information available to you that you can then provide some value to these owners and kind of give them an understanding of what the market looks like, so that maybe you can work out a deal with them or whatever else. So,
well, listen, for those of you guys who are still watching the channel, the live stream, we appreciate you very much. We'd love for you guys to give us your 2 cents. What are you thinking? What is your sentiment going into 2024? Love for you guys to comment down below and give us your thoughts. Obviously, make sure that you guys give this a thumbs up if you guys appreciate the channel, as well as what kind of content would you guys like to see? What kind of articles would you like to see? What type of information would you like us to cover? We always love some feedback. That is super, super appreciated. Also, for those of you who, by the way, if you come across any deals you guys need some support with, you guys can always be sending those deals to deals@CREnewshour.com. We check it all the time. So obviously we're here to support you guys and getting deals across the table, across the finish line. So if you guys need any support on those types of deals, send it to deals@CREnewshour.com.
Great conversation as always. Again, thank you all so much for tuning in. We tune in live every Wednesday, 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Continue to come back, continue to engage, and we look forward to seeing you guys next time.